But I go, can I just try another one? That moment comes and I just go, this is Sparta!
There are movies that entertain, and then there are movies that leave a permanent mark on culture, on cinema, and on the people who made them. Zack Snyder's 300, released in 2007, belongs firmly in the second category. Based on Frank Miller's graphic novel of the same name, the film told the story of King Leonidas and his legendary band of 300 Spartan warriors who stood against the colossal Persian army at the Battle of Thermopylae. It was loud, visually stunning, brutally physical, and unlike anything audiences had seen before. But for all the thunder it created on screen, the real story of 300 was happening somewhere far less glamorous, in sweat-soaked training rooms, overheated studios, and hospital waiting rooms. And for years, much of that story stayed quiet. Now, Gerard Butler, the man who roared, "This is Sparta," and made the world stop in its tracks, has been peeling back the curtain on what actually happened behind the camera. What he has revealed is far more intense than most fans ever imagined. When 300 opened in theaters in March 2007, the Hollywood establishment was not exactly holding its breath in anticipation. The film had no traditional A-list ensemble, no sprawling on-location production, and no guaranteed formula for success. What it had was a singular, uncompromising vision from its director and a cast willing to push themselves far beyond normal limits. Nobody predicted what happened next. The film pulled in approximately $70 million in its opening weekend alone, which was a staggering figure given its $60 million production budget. By the end of its theatrical run, 300 had grossed over $450 million worldwide, cementing its place as one of the most profitable and culturally significant films of that decade. What made this even more remarkable was the stripped-down nature of the production itself. The entire film was shot inside a studio in Montreal, Canada. There were no ancient Greek landscapes, no massive outdoor battle arenas, and no thousands of real extras filling the horizon. Nearly everything the audience saw, the cliffs, the skies, the seas of Persian soldiers, was built digitally in post-production. Roughly 90% of the film's shots relied heavily on visual effects and blue-screen technology. Zack Snyder essentially painted a world from scratch, using the actors as brushstrokes against a digital canvas. It was ambitious, risky, and visionary, and it worked in ways that surprised everyone, including the studio that released it. What audiences experienced as a mythic, beautifully lit world of ancient warfare was, in reality, a cramped and sweltering studio environment. The artificial lighting required to achieve the film's signature golden, high-contrast look generated intense heat on set. Actors dressed in minimal costumes and heavy armor were performing demanding physical choreography for hours under those conditions, day after day. The environment was genuinely punishing, and Gerard Butler has spoken candidly about just how bad it got. Butler has admitted that he passed out on set at least once due to a combination of dehydration and physical overexertion. Long shooting days under scorching studio lights, combined with the sheer physical demands of the fight choreography, pushed the cast to a point where their bodies simply began to give out. This was not an occasional rough day on set. This was the consistent, grinding reality of the production from start to finish. The beautiful slow-motion sequences that audiences marveled at were being filmed in an environment that felt closer to an endurance competition than a traditional movie shoot. Butler has also been open about the emotional and psychological weight of those conditions, acting against blue screens with no physical environment to react to, no real enemies to face, and no authentic landscape to draw from required a constant and exhausting act of imagination. Every moment of supposed grandeur had to be conjured internally, while the body was simultaneously screaming from fatigue. It was a dual demand unlike almost anything else in mainstream filmmaking at the time. One of the most striking things Butler has revealed about the making of 300 is just how dangerous the set actually was on a daily basis. Despite careful choreography and safety planning, injuries were a constant reality. In various interviews over the years, Butler has described the set as a place where someone was being taken to the hospital virtually every single day. Sprained ankles, cuts, bruises, and muscle tears were so common, they barely registered as noteworthy anymore. More serious incidents happened as well. A spear came dangerously close to an actor's eye during one fight sequence. Another cast member suffered a significant ankle fracture during a fall. These were not the kind of minor discomforts that come with any physically demanding production. These were genuine injuries that required genuine medical attention repeatedly. Part of the reason the injury rate was so high came down to a deliberate creative decision made by Snyder and the production team. Rather than relying heavily on stunt doubles for the major battle sequences, the actors themselves were encouraged and often expected to perform much of the action. The reasoning was straightforward. The film needed to look real, and it needed to feel real. Having the actual faces of the cast in the thick of the fighting, rather than cutting away to doubles, gave the battle sequences an authenticity and an energy that would have been impossible to fake. But that decision came at a price. The actors were not professional stuntmen. They were performers who had been put through months of intensive physical training, but they were still human beings, swinging real weapons in tight spaces while wearing cumbersome gear. The margin for error was vanishingly small, and errors happened constantly. Before a single frame was ever shot, the cast of 300 underwent one of the most grueling physical preparation programs in Hollywood history. Gerard Butler himself trained for approximately 7 months in advance of filming, working with elite fitness trainer Mark Twight at a facility called Jim Jones. The sessions were extreme by any standard, running up to 6 hours per day and combi. Ning CrossFit methodology, heavy strength training, martial arts drills, and simulated combat exercises. The goal was not simply to make the actors look muscular. The goal was to fundamentally transform their bodies and their relationship to physical effort. Butler has described the training as something that came close to destroying him. The relentless nature of the program led to a series of painful overuse injuries, including tendinitis, significant hip damage, and a torn rotator cuff. There were periods during training when he could barely raise his arms above his shoulders. Yet he kept going, driven by a combination of professional commitment and a personal desire to truly inhabit the character of Leonidas rather than simply perform him. He wanted the suffering to be real, because he believed the suffering would make the performance real. The famous 300 workout, which emerged from this preparation and was later published and adopted by gyms worldwide, consisted of 300 consecutive repetitions across a circuit of exercises, including pull-ups, deadlifts, push-ups, box jumps, floor wipers, and kettlebell drills, all performed without rest. The workout became a cultural phenomenon in its own right. Fitness magazines broke it down, trainers incorporated versions of it into their programs, and countless people around the world attempted it, most finding it nearly impossible to complete. Butler himself has admitted that after filming Wrapped, he was too physically depleted to do any real training for more than a year. The movie had taken everything he had. What separates Butler's portrayal of Leonidas from a simple physical performance is the level of psychological and spiritual investment he brought to the role. Butler has spoken in interviews about using meditation as a tool to access the character, describing his practice as an attempt to essentially channel the spirit of Leonidas through a kind of internal portal. It sounds unusual, perhaps even eccentric, but the intention behind it was entirely serious. Butler wanted to understand what it would actually feel like to lead 300 men into a battle with no realistic hope of survival, to look death in the face and choose to march toward it anyway. No amount of physical training could get him there on its own. He needed to go somewhere deeper. This psychological preparation ran alongside the physical work throughout the entire production. Even on set, in the moments between takes, Butler was not simply resting or reviewing his lines. He was maintaining a mental state, holding onto the thread of Leonidas, keeping himself in the emotional reality of a man facing impossible odds with unshakable resolve. It was an exhausting way to work. It demanded a constant output of emotional energy on top of an already enormous physical demand, but it produced results that were visible on screen. The performance Butler delivered in 300 does not feel like acting in the conventional sense. It feels like witness testimony. His decision to perform most of his own stunts was part of the same philosophy. He believed that if the audience could see him, really him, not a double, in the heart of the battle, the emotional impact would be qualitatively different. There is something that the camera captures when a performer is genuinely in a dangerous or difficult situation that simply cannot be replicated when they are standing safely off to the side while someone else takes the risks. Butler was willing to accept that danger as part of the price of authenticity. One of the most powerful and least discussed aspects of the making of 300 is the genuine bond that formed among the cast during the production. Butler has spoken warmly and at length about the sense of unity that developed among the actors, describing it as one of the most meaningful collective experiences of his professional life. The cast, which included Lena Headey, David Wenham, Dominic West, and the then-rising Michael Fassbender, were thrown together into the same brutal training regime from the very beginning. They suffered the same soreness, pushed through the same exhaustion, and faced the same seemingly impossible physical targets side by side. That shared suffering built something real between them. By the time filming actually began, the cast had already been through a kind of war together. They knew each other's physical limits. They had watched each other fail and get back up, and they had developed a wordless trust that translated directly into the way they moved and fought and communicated on camera. Butler has described it as one of the crucial elements that made the film's depiction of Spartan brotherhood believable. It was not manufactured for the camera. It was genuine. That camaraderie also helped them survive the grueling conditions of the shoot itself. The heat, the isolation of performing against blue screens, the repetitive takes, the constant physical discomfort. All of it became more bearable because they were facing it as a unit. They leaned on each other, encouraged each other, and maintained a collective sense of purpose that kept them going when individual motivation might have faltered. Michael Fassbender, reflecting on the experience later in his career, credited the group dynamic with keeping him focused and committed throughout one of the most demanding productions he had ever been part of. The legacy of 300 extends far beyond its box office numbers or its critical reception. The film fundamentally changed the way studios and filmmakers thought about visual storytelling. It demonstrated that a movie could dispense with traditional production design almost entirely and replace it with a cohesive, immersive digital world without losing emotional impact or audience engagement. Zack Snyder's signature style, the slow-motion combat, the high-contrast color grading, the mythic scale, became enormously influential, inspiring a wave of films and television productions that borrowed from its aesthetic language. The film also launched Gerard Butler into a completely different tier of Hollywood recognition. Before 300, he was a capable and charismatic actor without a defining role. After it, he was a global action star with a face and a voice that audiences around the world recognized instantly. The career he built in the years following, through the Fallen franchise, Law-Abiding Citizen, Greenland, and dozens of other projects, was made possible by the foundation that 300 laid down. But more than the career opportunities it created, 300 gave Butler something harder to quantify. The knowledge that he could endure more than he thought possible, suffer more than he thought survivable, and come out the other side with something genuine and lasting to show for it. That, ultimately, is the secret that most fans never fully figured out about 300. The film looks like a spectacle. It looks like myth and digital magic and stylized violence. But underneath all of it is something stubbornly, painfully human. The story of a group of real people who pushed their bodies and their minds to the absolute edge of what they could bear and somehow made it beautiful.